Hey class. So I wanted to make a quick video talking about some of the processing tips and things you can do in Vicon. So that's clear. I also went and created a Vicon file load, which I'll be posting to Canvas shortly. And I wanted to make a quick example of how to use that. So the first thing here is I did create a new pipeline inside Vicon Nexus that will run your data without exporting to Matlab. I'm going to recommend that you switch to using this one. And then I have a separate file that only exports to Matlab and also exports the force plate data, which wasn't being exported in the previous example for batch that some of you were using. The reason I wanted to separate these steps out is that if you have gaps in your data, you're going to want to fill those before you export to Matlab. And the example for batch is an automated process that's trying to automatically label the markers and export to Matlab. And so if you run that and then fix the marker gaps and then run it again, it is going to relabel your file using the auto labeling, which will undo your kind of manual filling of the markers. So let me run through how to run this for all of you so you can see what that looks like. I'm going to unmark these so that way they are unmarked, which is what it should look like at the start. So I'm using the walking data right now. This is P01. This is their sneaker condition or their shod condition with the kind of regular sneaker shoes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the 5 trials of interest. I don't need the static file. If you want to export the static file, you can, but I'm not sure I would recommend do that. I would just recommend including just the data that has kind of the movement that you want to record. So I'm going to highlight all 5 of those. I'm clicking on the first one, holding shift, clicking on the last one. It's going to select all of them. You can also hold control and select individual files if you want to be a little more selective about which of these you're going to process. You can right click and mark the nodes. That's going to highlight them. I can mark nodes across multiple sessions. So if I want to do something from a different session as well, I can highlight those. And those will show up over here if they're marked. So just as an example, I'll mark this one in the heels and it shows up on this list of batch processing files. If you don't see this list, it can be hidden with this little show file transfer / batch processing interface. And you do want to be on this central batch processing tab. There's a couple different options there. And if you're not seeing this whole thing, you can adjust these. And if you make it smaller, the little play and stop button will be kind of hidden. So pay attention to kind of how big your windows are. And if you're not seeing something, try looking for one of these slider bars to move that around. So I'm just going to run this just for the one condition. And I recommend you kind of do one condition per participant at a time. I'm going to select the batch process with no export. I'm going to run those. And it's should apply the labeling scheme for the individual. It should also look for kind of when the individual is fully in frame or fully being tracked and trim around that. If you're having trouble with markers kind of coming in and out a lot and this is not giving you good results, please come and see me. We can make a special kind of batch processing pipeline just for your participants or just for your study if this one is not working well for you. So if it's not working the way we expect it to, let's spend some time and think about that and see how we can make it work better. But this one works fine for here. On the quality tab here, there's kind of this data management overscreen. I can see the first number here. That's the number of markers that are missing. You're going to want to make sure that's 0. If you have missing markers, the MATLAB export won't work. It'll give an error because there's no data for it to export for that marker. Again, we can work around that. If that marker is really not important to you, we can remove it from the model and things like that. But if you're having that kind of an issue, come see me and we'll work on kind of what to do about it. The next one is the number of gaps. You want that to be 0 as well, although that's much easier to fix. We do want to fix that before we export to Matlab. And then the last one is the percentage of the markers that are currently visible inside the system. We want that to be 100%. So we want 0, 0, 100% before we export to Matlab. I'm going to take a look at Sneak02 to show you how we can fix some of these gaps. So when I double click on this file, I'm going to unmark it first. I'm going to clear the marks and then click on Sneak02. You see that's open here. You see right here at the top, it says P01 Sneak02. I have some gaps in here. So to fill those gaps, I want to come over to the labeling tab. So it's this little, looks like a packet, like a luggage tag or something like that, right? So that's our labeling tab. And then I don't need to look at this manual labeling unless I have unlabeled markers. And 99% of the time, you don't want to mess with anything inside this screen. So I'm going to hide that for now. And then here I have my list of gaps. And you see here, I have 7 gaps in the right lateral knee, and the maximum length is only 10 frames. So one of the things that we might not be able to fill using the spline fill if the gaps are too close together. So this gap here is not very long, but it's right next to another gap. And so it doesn't want to use the spline fill on that because the gaps are so close together. If you have cyclic data, so your data is repeating, like this is a walking trial, so there's some repetition there, it's going to give you the option for the cyclic fill. Any of these options works fine. All you really need to do is you need to look at that gap and make sure that the fill that it's suggesting, and that's based off the color of the line, is appropriate. In this case, the cyclic fill and the spline fill are both available to me, and either of those is fine. So I'll just go ahead and use the spline fill. Again, same thing here. You can see that those fills are more or less the same. I like the spline fill on that a little bit better. It looks a little smoother. On this one here, I could use either of those. The spline is kind of coming down a little bit. So maybe I don't want that. But if I zoom out, you can see that this is really only a very small kind of deviation from the position of the marker. The cyclic fill has got a little bit of a bump in it. If I don't like any of the options that are provided, or if I'm not given one of those options provided, then I would suggest moving to pattern fill as your next option. And the pattern fill, you have to pick a reference marker, and it's going to try and fill in with the same relative motion as on that reference marker. And most of you should have a marker that's adjacent to the one you're looking at that you can use for your pattern fill. So in this case, since this is the knee, I could pattern with the thigh or with the shank marker. The shank marker is closer, so I'd probably use that one. I'll pick source. I'll click on the shank marker, and now it gives me the option to also use that pattern fill. And you can see it's maybe a little bit smoother than these cyclic fill, so I'll go ahead and use that one. Now, that source marker is still selected. You can see it says RSK here. So as long as I leave that selected, it's going to give me that as an option for my pattern fill. And again, it's just another one I can use. I like this one better than either of the two options given here. Probably the cyclic fill looks fine too, but I'll go ahead and click fill for that. That one's a little messy, but it gets my only option. And again, this is a really small section of data, so I'm not too concerned. I'll go ahead and fill that in as well. Here, maybe I like the spline a little better. You can use a subjective assessment. Pick out which one you think here is best. Most of the time, if your gaps are small, so again, these are like 10 frames and things like that, it's not going to make a big difference on your overall data. You're probably going to want to filter this anyways. You'll notice that even the raw data is a little bit bumpy. So those things are not fills. That's just kind of marker tracking error. And those variations are probably around 1 millimeter, 1 or 2 kind of millimeters of distance. They're pretty small, even though it looks a little bit rough. And so that looks good. I've got that trial is now completely filled. I'm going to save the trial. So click on the save button. You'll notice when I save it, this updates to 0, 0, 100. And that's what I want to get to. I want to get to that 0, 0, 100. So I can go to my next trial, repeat the same process. So there's my sneak 3. I've got 3 gaps across 2 markers. They're fairly straightforward. Just fill them in. Look and see, it looks okay. That looks fine. I'll fill it in. And you also want to play back these files and make sure that none of the markers are switching. If the markers are switching, you probably you can manually fix that, or maybe the subject that you're using has not been calibrated well. You might want to recalibrate that subject. That's one of the things you want to watch for while you're recording the data. It's much easier to fix as you're recording it. And so hopefully you're all watching that as we're going through. This looks fine. I don't see any markers behaving weird. I got my force plate data. It's giving me the ground reaction forces just fine. Everything there looks good. Again, I'll save that and I'll move on to the next one. Once you've gone through and you've kind of got the files that you want all at 0, 0, 100, then you want to export that to Matlab. So I'm using shift click to get those 3 files. I'm going to mark them. I'm going to change this from batch with no export to marker and force to Matlab. So this is exporting marker and force data to Matlab. And then I'm going to run this. It's going to export those 3 files to Matlab. And again, in this case, that's all it's doing. It's not going to modify any of the data that I have adjusted. And so this is the advantage of this over the example for batch, is that I can clean things up. And then when I run this, it doesn't lose that cleaning that I had done when I export to Matlab. And again, that's helpful for me to be able to do. Now that I have exported that, so all those 3 of those have run, I can come into Matlab, and this doesn't need to be on the same computer. And what I would suggest that you do is you go to the folder for your data. So it should be in C, projects, biomechanics, F22. In this case, we're on walking, participant 1, session 1. And we see here's all the files we just did. If I start this by modified, see the 1, 2, 3. These are the ones that have been just recently modified. This is all participant 1, but it's sneak 1, 2, 3, and I get 3 most recently, and then 2, and then 1. I would sort this by type. So now I have my MATLAB files. These are the 3 that I just kind of cleaned and exported. Now sneak 4 and 5, they did export from a previous run that this group had gone through, but those ones haven't been cleaned yet, so I don't really want to exclude those. I could take that and then I can put that into my Microsoft Teams, go into your Teams channel. So go to your main page, biomechanics. So here's the walking group. I can go into the files, and then I can make a new folder for MATLAB exports. And then inside that folder, I can put in the .mat files. Again, if you already have a folder for your group, you can just put them in there. You don't need to make new folders for everything. All of your files should have a unique ID. So they should have the participant and the task ID in the file. And so you shouldn't have any duplicate names of files. So you should be able to dump everything into one folder and have it look fine. Last thing I'll talk about is the Vicon file loads. The Vicon file load here. This is going to be posted shortly to Canvas. And what this is going to do is just going to compile all of the data from your MATLAB exports into one structure that has everything in it. So when I run this, it's going to go through, and in MATLAB, it's going to pull out all the .mat files. So I'm currently in this session 1 for walking. It's going to add them to this data structure. Sorry, I probably have more than one instance of MATLAB open. There we go. So it's going to pull it into this data structure, and then in that data structure, it's going to have all of the files that you had kind of MATLAB files for in that one structure. Now, this is convenient for being able to go back and look at data very easily. But what I really suggest that you do is when you're processing, you put your code into the actual Vicon file load and then save this as something else for, like, say, walking. So this is the Vicon file load walking now. And then if I have something I want to calculate, say I want to look at the, let's say, the relative position of the ankle with respect to the hip. So I could look at data file name. I'm just thinking real quick if I want to rename this to use the field names. I probably do. So I'm just going to add an extra line here. That file name. This is just a little bit of debugging for future purposes, and I'll make this the new upload as we get to it. Yeah, that's what I want. Let's put this here, and then I can make this a little bit more concise. So this is just some robustness in case the name of the file and the name of the field end up being different. They really shouldn't be because of the way it's coded, but I just want to be careful. So data.file name, and then I can say the name of the marker. So we say we want to look at the right lateral ankle. I think I'm going to look at that with respect to, let's say, the greater trochanter. So RGT. And then I can assign that to a relative marker position. So I can say relative, well, let's say RLA with respect to RGT. I do need to make sure I spell these marker names correctly. So RGT. And so that should be fine. And so I can run this. And now inside my files, I should have this new calculated outcome that I can do whatever I want with. And I can also put plots and things like that inside here. So if I want to plot all of these markers kind of on top of each other, I could say if I'm interested in the X position of this. This is going to be X. So that's the first value. And then we'll do hold on. So we can look at it for all those different files. And again, this is going to give me a plot of, oh, sorry. I want all of the rows first column, not all of the columns first row. And so that's the RGG position, the relative position of the angle with respect to the greater true counter for all the files. Now, probably you want to normalize that. So you can go back and look at the normalization lecture and figure out, okay, what's this from heel strike to toe off or something like that. But there's also lots of videos on Canvas that you can use. And after you run this Vicon file load and you've got your setups up, the processing will be the same as it was for all the examples we've done in class. So hopefully that's helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, good luck. And I hope you all have a good time collecting your data through the rest of the week. Thanks.